Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on the system in which I've got the red wigglers that I refer to as my original red wiggler worms. These guys have been living in these systems now for 112 days, fed 10 times so far, and I guess the common theme in most of my check-ins over the past few days has been that we're coming in a interval that's a little bit less than we normally would. And that's mainly because I'm preparing to be away for a number of days. If you're a regular on my channel, you're probably getting tired of hearing me explain that over and over and over again for each of my check-ins that have been occurring over the past few days. Because once I go away, I'm going to be gone for probably about a week and a half or a little bit longer. And I just want to make sure that all my systems are in good shape. So I'm making sure I've checked in on all of them before I go, and then I'll feel a somewhat better peace of mind knowing that all my wormies are in good shape and well fed and have everything that they need, and that they could do okay without me, at least for a little while. So I've got this carton here that I used the other day to soak some really old dry bread, and I thought that perhaps if I jam it in here I could preserve some of this top covering leafy matter that we rested out here on the top surface as sort of a top dressing. I've got more of the stuff here on standby, so I thought we would lay down a fresh top coating of it, and that the stuff that I gather up here in the beginning could be utilized as supplemental bedding to accompany the feeding that we're going to apply today. So besides the collected leafy matter that I want to apply as bedding down in the feeding zone, I've also got some napkins. Me trying to do away with my huge collection of napkins is also a little bit of a running theme lately. So my hope is that I can slip 3 of these large napkins into the feeding zone of each of these systems to accompany their lovely assortment of veggies. And I've got some fruits too, in the form of an entire container of blueberries. So let's get to work on feeding these little guys. There was no feeding zone indicator to show us where we last fed, but when there isn't one, we can usually rely on the fact that my default or de facto feeding location in most of my systems is simply down the middle. So it is fair to assume that that's where we last fed. Oh, I see a little piece of label adhering to this chunk of watermelon rind, so we're already getting a little glimpse into what they got fed last time. I believe in addition to watermelon rind, there was also some banana peel included. I just did a really quick skim through the video from last time just to refresh my memory on how things went in here. There's the stem of the banana peel. And stuff like this pumpkin stem, that would go way back to a feeding probably quite some time ago. Pumpkin stems are just those sort of things that'll probably outlive most worm bins, unless your worm bin's going to go for a good year and a half or 2 years. So in most cases, the pumpkin stems simply accompany the worms from their old home to their new home when the time comes to harvest their lovely castings and relocate them into a new space. So I think we've adequately excavated here to make room enough for today's feeding. Since we're pretty generous today with the bedding, with all those collected leaves as well as 3 napkins per feeding zone, I'm making sure to leave a good large space. And I'm kind of glad that the stuff we're putting in is a little bit dry, because the moisture level in these systems feels a bit high. I wouldn't want to see things get muddy or anything like that. And I guess that'll be a good excuse for us to sort of till around the system at the end and make sure everything is kind of loose and flaky if possible. And hopefully we won't find too much stuff getting clumped together. Sometimes I wonder if the reason my systems do eventually get clumpy is because I allow for the concentration of castings to grow to too high a level, and then all you've really got is just castings material, which once it gets too damp will begin to stick to itself and become clumpy. So I think that all this leafy matter that's floating around here and there since we did leave a good bit of it remaining after we collected up some of it to use in the feeding zone, I think blending it in will aid in keeping the material loose in general. So let's get to dropping in their yummy feeding here today. I figured we can just begin by dropping in some paper right below the yummy veggies, onto which we can maybe even sprinkle a little bit of leafy matter. Perhaps we can come in at this with sort of a layered approach. Alrighty. These are really large, luxurious, thick napkins with some nice embossed patterns on them and everything. My mom gets these from the IKEA, and she's pretty much brand loyal to IKEA when it comes to her napkins. She's got a whole assortment of yellow, red, green, orange. She's got all these different colors, and she can pick whatever color she likes when it comes time to feed her guests, because she can pretty much match the color of the napkins to suit any occasion. Alright, that seems to me like a pretty nice foundation onto which we can rest the feeding. But let's not forget to return all this old stuff. Sometimes I kind of space out and leave all that stuff over on the side after gathering it up, and realize kind of late in the game that the stuff really belongs down in the feeding zone, not out on the surface. Because once we start dropping in all this delicious food, all this stuff will trigger a nice response in the worms, causing them to come out and hopefully go crazy on the delicious meal we just gave them. I did wonder if we'd be getting back in here in time, soon enough after the last feeding, to catch the wormies still mobbing around that watermelon that we gave them last time. I mean, we saw that chunk of rind, but not a whole lot, so it does seem like they might have already kind of done away with the majority of it. As far as leftovers go, I would say we saw a very minimal amount of leftovers from the last feeding. So 8 days in this particular case didn't seem like it was too soon. I mean, when it comes to banana peels, to find a stem or even some banana peel leftover is certainly not unusual, because those are the sorts of things that just take a little bit longer to break down. Oh, what was this? Oh, it's like half of a kiwi. Is there another half of a kiwi? I guess maybe the first half got consumed, was deemed substandard, and then it ended up in the collection of worm bin foods. This is stuff that I probably got from my mom, because it doesn't look like something I would have prepared here around the house. So sometimes it is a little bit of a crapshoot in terms of what we're going to get when it comes to feeding the wormies. I don't necessarily inspect every contributed package of food given to me by my mom for worm bin feeding, so sometimes there's a little surprise in store for us. And I got a feeling that this real seasoned and broken in material that we collected in the beginning is going to serve as a really nice top coating for this feeding zone, giving the worms some really nice kind of familiar material to come hang out in. And then we'll just drop this fresh stuff out onto the top surface. But before we do that, why don't we use the covering up of the feeding zone as sort of an excuse to do what I mentioned earlier, which is to see if we could till around the rest of the material in the bin to see if we could blend in some of this residual leafy matter that was left out on the surface. It's probably a good thing to have little bits of bedding scraps and stuff floating around in the material that's starting to get dominated with the high number of castings in terms of, like, you know, percentage wise. It is kind of nice to look through the stuff that you're tilling up and stirring around and find a lot of worms in it. That's kind of what I found over here when I excavated the edge closest to me over here in bin number 2. I wonder if we're going to get a similar treat when we take care of bin number 1 over here. Look at that. Somehow the worms, I don't know, I guess they must have come in and enjoyed that nice feast of watermelon rinds. Perhaps they took a little nibble out of the banana peels, chewing off what they can and making the decision to come back later to polish off the rest, since it was somewhat tougher material that they couldn't do away with entirely. And yeah, the stuff over here is definitely damp. So getting it out near the surface to let it air out a little bit and possibly kick off some of what it seems to me like excess moisture might not be a bad idea. Yeah. Little worm parties happening here and there. Nowhere near the feeding zone. In fact, about as far as away from the feeding zone as you can get out on the outer edge. So let's give these little guys what I mentioned earlier, a little top dressing of leafy matter. No feeding zones today. I mean, no feeding zone indicators today. So we're not feeding coffee, or coffee filters are unavailable. So all we're covering up with is what we had when we first started, or the newspaper top covering. So these little guys will hopefully be good until I get back from my little getaway. But that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.